Hello, everyone, and welcome to Elevating Voices, Women of Color in Leadership. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of allyship and understanding for elevation of women of color. So women of color are often underrepresented in leadership and yet make up a significant portion of today's workforce. Companies must ensure that they are meeting the needs and expectations of women of color in their workforce by recognizing the unique lived experiences and challenges faced by the varied identities that make up this group. So today, please welcome our speakers and join us to hear about the experiences of women of color in the workforce and highlight of WBC's Women of Color in Leadership report. I'm Kimberly Lee Miner, and I am the CEO of the Women of Color Retail Alliance. And just to frame up what we're talking about in the workforce, in retail, there are 52 million jobs in the United States. Women make up 60% of the workforce, yet are only 37% of the leadership. And women of color only represent 6% of the 37%. So those are the gaps that we are talking about, and that's where the focus needs to be across all industries. So I'm really happy to be here, and I am with Purba Majumder. She is the CEO of Cybervation. Tori Holland, Congressional Delegate, United Keetoowah Band, and Sandra Quince, Business Enablement and Leader on Loan Executive, Bank of America, and Paradigm for Parity board member. Thank you all for being here with us today. Okay, we're going to jump right in because we have a lot to talk about and we only have maybe 28 minutes. So let's get started. So let's start with number one. So if you had to level set for allies and members in the audience today, we know that WBC is a forum and a community for all women. However, we are seeing more companies modifying their practices toward a more inclusive workforce workplace with equity. Equity, remember that word, being under attack by conservative groups and board activists. We also know that we can be allies and we can focus on women, but if we don't focus on the underrepresented, the whole group will not rise. And so as we continue to hear these attacks, we know that this will impact women, of course, but please underscore, why do you feel that it is so important that we have a specific panel today to focus on women of color and the representation in corporate leadership? That's a heavy question, but I'm going to start with Purba.
Thank you, Kimberly. Yes, of course, this is a very important and very close to my heart. This topic is very close to my heart. So when I started my career in the early days as an immigrant person of color in the corporate workplace, I experienced different types of discrimination because of my appearance, my accent, or the way I speak. I had to overcome significant barriers to move up the corporate ladder. And even as a business owner, I still face these types of barriers. As I was planning to speak about this issue today, I was talking to my 25-year-old daughter, who is born and raised in America. And she still says that she faces those barriers as someone who is beginning her career. And mind you, she has the same types of, background or the access to resources as any other American, who is not brown in color. So she mentions that it is very disheartening for her to see that there is less diversity in C-suite and specifically women of color, the higher up she goes. And she feels that it is difficult to see her career, how her career will progress when she doesn't see women who look like her or, just in those roles in the C-suite or the boardroom. So that's why representation matters. And it's important to promote women from different backgrounds and so that they can see themselves in those roles in the C-suites. Seeing women of color in leadership positions is essential for inspiring the next generation of women leaders, particularly from marginalized communities, and it demonstrates that such roles are attainable, or it encourages greater participation in some fields, especially in STEM, which I'm very passionate about.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Purba. Tori or Sandra, would you like to jump in here?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Purba, for starting us off there. And I'm gonna, chime in on that. I agree. You can't be what you can't see, number one. Number two, if you go back and you look at all the data, and I'm going to just use data to say why we should be having this conversation. The data tells us that companies that have a more diverse workforce are more profitable. That data was proven 30 years ago. It was proven 25 years ago. It was proven 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and it is still relevant today. The other thing is, if you looked at the McKinsey Women in the Workplace study that just came out and you look at parity, so it's going to take nearly 50 years to achieve gender parity for all women. But let me break that down for you. What they're basically saying is that it is 22 years to parity for white women. It is 48 years for parity for women of color. So why are we having this conversation? Well, the data rings true. Women of color are not represented at every level of leadership. Women of color are not represented and are disproportionately impacted in most organizations.
Absolutely, because I believe it's about 40% of families of color are led by a single woman. And so if you take that and add that with the data that you just shared, you can almost visually see the disparity and the impact on culture, on the future, on every aspect of where we are going and moving forward as a culture. Tori?
Yeah. So as a Keetoowah, we are a matriarchal society. So we have always historically valued women's opinions. And I think that there is a benefit to corporations for having more women involved in leadership roles. One, it gives you more innovation and growth because you have different perspectives. And then second, you get a better performance because you're now making decisions based off the reflective customer that you're trying to get to. So I think it's a benefit for the corporations. I think it's a benefit for all women to be in leadership positions as well. And as a Keetoowah, we have strongly encouraged those matriarchal societies. So I would love to see that more in the workplace.
As we're having this conversation, and this wasn't one of the questions, but I'm thinking about, we talk about how we add value, right? The businesses do better, and yet people are against it. They're afraid of it. It's just such a big disconnect for me. I just don't understand it. And then we have to always prove how much more value we bring, right? When no other groups don't really have to do that. And so it's just, aside from being frustrating, it's really a quandary for me. It's like, okay, so it's proven. Diverse teams add value. Why do we have to continue to say, oh, we add more? Oh, we add more. We should just be a part of this because it's proven now. It's not a new fact. It's not something that's brand new to the table. We've been having this conversation for a very long time. And as a matter of fact, Citicorp said in a report very recently that if the pay gap and the employment gap for women had been addressed 20 years ago, we would have added something like $12 trillion to the U.S. economy. 12 trillion with a T. So it's just unbelievable. So that's why today is important and tomorrow and every day to have this conversation. So we'll move on to the next question because I think we get stuck here because there's so much to talk about. So in WBC's Women of Color briefing this year, there was a report that came out earlier. They reported that a lack of disaggregated data and research about the many underserved populations that comprise the WOC population continues to be a major barrier to truly equitable corporate cultures, working to the disadvantage of both the women themselves and corporate profitability. And I know as a leader of an organization focused on closing the gaps, it is very difficult to find the research at the intersections to really support the actions and to show what the progress looks like. It's very surface. So how important do you believe, and Sandra, I know you started with data, so I know you believe this, but how important is data to drive representation of women of color throughout corporate organizations, from leadership pipeline to the C-suite and then to the boardrooms? Where does self-identification enter into this representation? And do you think it helps or does it hinder progress? So who'd like to grab that question first?
Yeah, definitely it helps progress, because what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. What gets measured gets done, right? And so what companies have to do is they have to be able to run data and analytics. So picture this, Kimberly, you work for a university. I work for a corporation. And there is no way that they would build strategy without data.
That's right.
Data has to lead the way. And so it's the same thing with your people processes. There's no way for you to be able to combat this issue or challenge without data. Right. And when you look at data, oftentimes what companies will do is they will pull data on women, they will pull data on people of color, but then they won't break down what that looks like. And so you have to be able to look at women, not as a monolith, but you have to be able to peel the onion back and you have to say, what does it look like for Black women? What does it look like for Hispanic women? What does it look like for Asian women? What does it look like for American Indian women? Like, what does it look like for women at all of these subsets and populations? Because what you'll find is there are areas where white women are making progress and they are making well more progress, and it's diluting the progress that you're seeing. And so whenever we're in, an economic downturn, we're in a time where diversity is under fire. And so what you're going to start to find is that we're going to lose ground. And where we're going to lose ground is going to be with all women, but more specifically, we're going to lose ground with women of color. And let me say this, Kimberly, earlier we talked about, so you asked me about, let me go to self-representation before I make this next statement. Self-representation, okay, or identifying who you are for an organization is so critical. And I know sometimes people will say, well, why does my company need this information? Well, they need that information. Right. You're afraid because you don't know what are they going to do with it. And I think for companies, when you do go out and you ask for the information, it's all about how you ask. You're asking people to opt in. You're asking people to show us who you are so we know who works for us, so we can take this information and meet the needs of our employee base. But then you got to do that, and you got to do something positive with it. And so for organization, it is critical for them to know who works for me and where do they sit in the organization. And they have to understand at every level of leadership, I should be hiring at or above where I am today. There's no way for you to know that unless you're measuring progress. So let me say that. Let me also address what we said earlier of why this conversation is so important. We're not saying that there are not women that have made it up and through the C-suite, because that has happened.
Yeah.
But as women, we also have to be allies to each other.
That's right.
And when you look at HR is 70% women in probably every organization known to man.
Right.
And they're the conscience keepers. So if we're the conscience keepers, then we should be ensuring that we're holding our organizations accountable for this level of progress.
Right. And I totally agree with you. I think in situations, oftentimes, instead of those processes and practices being across the whole business, they just kind of sit in HR, right? And if you've got HR over here and everyone else is doing something else, then HR is either seen as the gatekeepers. They're seen as, the people you don't want them coming because when they come, they're only coming to, let somebody go or reprimand someone. And that creates a different set of power. Whereas if the power was across the organization and everyone flowed up to the same purpose, same leadership, as opposed to being siloed and being separate, I think you would see more people, because they would think, oh, it's my responsibility too. I have skin in this game. And I think that oftentimes we miss that. And I also think in some organizations, because they put women in HR, they take some of the power away when it should be the other way around, right? Because that's the most valuable asset any company has, is its people, and understanding that. And earlier, I gave the data around the industry that I'm focused on, and it's really interesting when you look at self-identification, or if you look at the ESG reports for these public companies, and they're winning every, you see a different, best place to work, most DEI focus, their diversity. But when you really look at the reports, and everyone out there should be looking at the reports, because you should know what the company is doing. But when you look at the reports, yes, they're diverse, but their diversity sits in usually two places. It sits in the front line if it's a retail company, that applies to banking with tellers, it applies to hospitality with wait staff. It goes across the board, but it's sitting frontline. And it's sitting in the distribution center. And so those are the lowest paid positions in the company. And so that's where it continues to be an issue. But I could be on my soapbox forever. Tori, Purba, jump in, please.
So I just want to add, go ahead, Purba.
No, go ahead.
I just want to add that as a lawyer, I really love hard, concrete evidence, and data gives you that. Data gives you something to focus on. But what's frustrating to me is it's oh, well, you're Native American, so you go in this little bucket. Well, there's over 500 federally recognized tribes. You cannot group all Native Americans in this one bucket and have that be an accurate representation across the board. I'm Keetoowah. We are related to the Cherokees. We're similar to the Creeks and the Choctaws and the Seminole. We're not like the Navajo. We're not like the Ponca. But people don't realize that, and they're just oh, you're Native American, so here's your box. And that's really frustrating. So it would be nice to have data that actually picked up on the differences within those diversity buckets.
Totally agree with that. Totally agree.
Yeah, totally. Just everybody is saying, I think that it is important for everyone to see themselves as it's directly related to the representation that appeals to you. Because, what is going to appeal to me is different from what is going to appeal to you, Kimberly, or, Tori or Sandra. So that's why, for example, women of South Asian descent will look for role models who are mentors, or, who come from that part of the world, because those are the people that they're looking up to. And those are the people that would represent and give them hope for the next, give us hope for the next generation. So that's why self-identification is so important, I think.
Well, thank you. Yep, totally agree. So we'll move on. So McKinsey and Lean found in a study of 300 organizations and 40,000 employees that only one in four C-suite leaders are women, and only 1 in 20 are women of color. This can be attributed to the broken rung culture, where both women and women with intersectional identities are promoted at lesser rates than men overall. So here's a little more data to frame that up. So according to McKinsey, for every 100 men who are promoted at that first opportunity to get promoted, for every 100 men, 89 women are promoted. Now, to your earlier point, when you look at 89, you're like, well, it's not where it should be, but it's not that bad. But it is, because now if you go to the intersections, paints a very different picture. So for every 100 men, 91 white women get promoted. Okay, so put that number, 91. There are 87 Asian women, and this is to your point, Tori, they are in buckets. So 87 Asian women, 64 Latinas, and 52 Black women. So essentially, Black women are just half. We all walk in and we have the same qualifications, and if I talk about retail, it's a very equal circle. 21% women of color, 27 white women, 24 white men, and 18 men of color. That's how we walk in entry level. By the time you get to VP, from 21 to 8. That's the fall off. But for white men, it's from 27 to 50. And so you continue to see that that's what the broken rung does. It sets it up so that exponentially we fall back behind. So based on all of that, what do you believe is the most impactful roadmap for allies to support women of color at the first level, as individuals, and at the organizational level? Sandra.
I say sponsorship. You have to say her name at those influential tables. If you are a leader of influence, if you are a senior leader in an organization, part of your role, especially if you're included in those talent planning conversations, part of those performance management processes that every company is getting ready to go through, probably in this very moment. It is your responsibility. Part of your job should be to sponsor people who, A, look like you, but also who, B, don't look like you.
Right.
And that should be a role. No one, and let me be very clear when I say this, no one makes it to the top. You cannot become the president of a university. You cannot become a CEO of a company without sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm not saying is that you're not good at what you do, because obviously you are, or you would not have the sponsorship.
Right.
It comes naturally for some, and others it has to be facilitated. And it has to also be a part of what we expect of our leaders.
Agree.
And
Tori?
allies have to be upstanders. I'm sorry. They have to be upstanders, right? They have to see something, say something. Who's missing from the table? Who's not being talked about? Who hasn't had the opportunity to be developed? And those are the questions as an ally I can ask. But I also have to educate myself on the data and know where we are and understand that and be prepared when I go into those situations. I apologize, Kimberly.
No worries. Look, we're all passionate about this. Allies stand in the gap, right? Sponsors move us forward, and mentors are trusted advisors. Just to put it out there, because people ask for mentors all the time. You have to understand what each of these stand for and how they impact your career. Tori.
I have had a lot of wonderful mentors in my life. And one of the things that they've taught me is you're always training your replacement, right? So I have had judges who have taken me under their wing. They've taught me how to be a prosecutor. They've taught me how to do different things. I've had business attorneys take me under their wing and teach me things that they know. But they've always instilled in me, like, you have to train the next generation. Like, it is up to you. We are teaching you what we know. You have to teach the next generation. So you're always training your replacement. And I think that goes in every aspect of life. Like, find people, not just one person, find multiple people, invest in them, teach them what you know, help them climb the ladder, because at some point we're all going to retire. So you're always finding your next replacement.
Absolutely. Purba.
We've all talked about this issue, but to me, the education for the managers is very important. They have to understand the challenges people who are working under them are facing. So if they have to recognize that there are challenges, there are disparities, there are, like stereotypes, there are microaggressions, things like that. Once they recognize that, then they are able to help their employees, right? So I think that plays a big role. And once they recognize that, then how can they give more visibility to the people that are working for them? Is it giving them more access to resources? Is it connecting to their network? Or is it, talking about the training opportunities? What is it that this person can benefit from this ally? Because the ally, of course, is successful. He knows or she knows, what to do. But here, there is a person who needs that kind of training, who's looking for that kind of connection. So if that, we can solve that, at that level, then, we will see a lot more progress.
Yeah. Education is really the heart of a lot of what it takes to be a strong ally and to understand how you can stand in the gap and why you need to. We walk around so but self-centered, because we know what we know and we know the people around us. And there's a book, it's called Cultural Map. And I recommend it to anyone who's in business to understand how important understanding different cultures helps you grow as a leader, and helps your organization grow. And so, we have 4 minutes. This conversation has gone so quickly, but we have 4 minutes left. And so I'm going to take us to our last question. WBC always likes to end the call with a call to action to our communities and corporations, women-owned businesses, and individual leaders. And as we said, allyship is so important in what we're talking about. What would be your call to action to anyone who's watching? Purba, I'll start with you.
I think for me, I strongly feel about the mentorship and the sponsorship, like really pulling people, moving forward, pulling people along with me. So that is a call to action that, I think is really going to make a lot of impact. We can all talk about, all these policies, this and that, but at the grassroots level, it's person to person. So if I'm not trying to help who I'm working with, then, we're not going to see the difference. It has to be everyone coming forward and doing this together. And that's the only way we can create a more equitable and inclusive corporate world.
Thank you. Tori, what's your call to action?
Go for it. So the worst they can do is tell you no. You're a woman, you want a raise, go ask for your raise. The worst they can do is tell you no. You want to promote diversity and inclusion? Go for it. Find the people and just go do it. Make the things happen. Bring your best self every day, do the best you can, and just go for it.
Thank you. And Sandra, do you want to bring us home?
Yeah, I'm in a similar vein, and I would say just do it. Use Nike. I'm with you, Tori. Do something, because something has to be done. And if we as women don't support each other, we've got to find ways to support each other and be allies and sponsors for each other. The other thing I would say is, as a partner of WBC Paradigm for Parity, PARADIGM, the number 4, PARITY.org is a wonderful organization to join, because they help support you from a strategic perspective, as well as help support you and the women and allies in your organization to close the gender parity gap.
Thank you very much. And that sets me up to say thank you. This conversation has been amazing. And I also would like to just give a little shout out to the Women of Color Retail Alliance. We are a broad-based organization focused on any job or resource related to customer experience. And so www.wocra.org retailalliance.org, and we focus on, very similar to Paradigm for Parity, we focus on the individual as well as on the organization, because we can help you all day, but if the organization is not ready for you, it's not ready for you. And then the progress stops. So really excited for this conversation. So I was really excited for this conversation. So I want to thank you all for your time and your dedication to making a difference for women of color to move into leadership roles. Let's build that pipeline and let's be supportive so that we can see a difference, a notable difference in the future for women of color in leadership. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.